morning, everyone. Before you sit down, could we do something that we only do on Veterans Day every year, and that's to pledge the flag. Turn towards the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Before I begin my formal remarks, I want to extend kudos to all of you for the end of another successful athletic season and the events of the weekend that signaled what we're all about as a school. First of all, to Mr. Phillips and Ms. Karofkin in particular for their leadership of the senior play, and for all of you who participated in it as actors or set designers or behind the scenes in any way. I don't know when I've seen a more enjoyable production in the Smith Theater, and I wonder if you were involved in that play at all, if you could stand for a moment. If you're an actor or you were behind the scenes or you helped with the sets, or whatever it was. Congratulations, a round of applause for all of those people. We hosted the New England Championship, Class 2 Championship in cross country this weekend, and there are lots of people involved in the preparation for that and the execution of that particular event. It redounded in our favor clearly because both our JV and our varsity teams prevailed after having had setbacks more recently in the season, and we're grateful to everybody who participated in arranging that, especially Dr. Dunn. But to the team as well, congratulations on a great day. We'll have more to say about our athletic fortunes later on, but well done, cross-country program. You know, of course, that our soccer team advances to the postseason tournament, and we'll be playing Nobles on Wednesday in a game that begins at 2 o'clock. We'll have more to say about the schedule for that day, but I hope that most of you in this room plan on attending that event and supporting our team. Yesterday, we hosted over 600 people for our open house, our admission open house. Many of you participated in a similar event earlier in the fall. But again, I want to say thank you for the way in which you welcome people to our school, which is, I think, part of who we are as a school. And I wonder if you were helping in any way with the event yesterday, if you would please stand. Thank you very much. Well done. You may be seated. Welcome to this morning's Veterans Day Commemoration Hall. The program today honors those veterans who are with us, and also all those others who have served our country in peacetime and wartime over the past 250 years. Their commitment, loyalty, and service to our country, to the values for which it stands, and for each one of us ought never to be forgotten. I'm delighted to welcome to Hall today members of our community who have served our country and the armed forces. Would you please join me in acknowledging this morning's speaker, Jimmy Joyce, class of 14, Bob Powers, class of 66, Father William Kennedy, class of 77, Domenico Pellegrini, class of 2004, Matt McClellan, Bo Bai, and Casey Furnas, and former faculty member Ed Ellison. Would they and any other members of our faculty, staff, or guests who have served please stand to receive our recognition. Veterans Day, originally called Armistice Day, was established at the conclusion of World War I to commemorate the service, sacrifice, and valor of those who had heeded their country's call, and in many cases offered the supreme sacrifice, indeed, their lives. 105 years ago Saturday, on November 11th, 1918, the armistice was signed, ending the war that for 4 years had raged throughout Europe, exacting the suffering and lives of millions of young Europeans and Americans. It was the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Nearly 5 million American boys were part of that war effort. 200,000 were injured, and 110,000 were killed. In June of 1917, 24 RL graduates were in the service. And by October 1918, more than 250 RL graduates were wearing the country's uniform. To offer some perspective, please be reminded that the school only graduated between 20 to 25 boys in those days. 250 is a whopping representation of that cohort. 13 former students were killed in action or training during World War I. On the back of your program, please find a list of RL boys who made the ultimate sacrifice. During World War II, 250 RL graduates served in the U.S. military, and 19 were killed in action or training. Those 250 servicemen, too, constituted an especially high percentage of RL students of an age to serve. As remember, in those years, most graduating classes again numbered 25 or 30. Many more recent graduates have served in Korea and Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Over the years, nearly 50 million Americans have been part of military service during war. Over the past few years, we have welcomed on this important day several speakers, typically veterans themselves, who have shared their stories. It was our founders' hope that Roxbury Latin would prepare boys for service. And in offering you examples of those who have served in the military, I believe we have reminded you of this distinctive opportunity. Many of our young men who have signed on over the past several years report that these annual halls made an impression on them. Currently in active duty on behalf of our country are the following alumni: Matt Nealon, class of '09, Josh Rivers, 11, Robert Powell, 11, Paul Baudet, 12, Justice Gibson, 12, Tom Warner, 13, Martin Buckley, 15, Joe Doherty, 17, Mitchell Garvey, 17, Ryan LaRoe, 17, Reed Corliss, 20 in ROTC, John Paul Buckley, 22 in ROTC, and Nolan Walsh, 22 in ROTC. Through these RL men, we can draw a direct and impressive line to those World War II vets honored by the school several years ago, to 4 RL alumni casualties in the Civil War, and to RL's most famous veteran, General Joseph Warren, class of 1755, who lost his life at Bunker Hill. The inclination to serve our country is a natural extension of Eliot's admonition to serve, as he said, church and commonwealth. I've had different feelings about military service throughout my life. I certainly was proud of my father's service during World War II. He spent 38 months in the Army Air Corps in North Africa and Europe. But I had great ambivalence about the military during my own late teens, when my contemporaries and I were subjected to a draft that landed many of us in Vietnam, in a war many of us found unconscionable. Now, with a volunteer army, I'm newly regardful of our graduates, many of them who sign on for a hitch in the military. Whether through military academies, the ROTC, or direct enlistment, our boys have heeded the call to lead and serve. And I hope these annual halls have inspired many to do so. As a fan of mandatory service of any kind, I celebrate spending some time before or after college in service to our country, as an act of sacrifice and in gratitude for our citizenship and the many blessings we enjoy.
In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing, fly scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.
They veiled their souls with laughter, and many a mocking pose. These lads who follow after, wherever freedom goes. These lads we used to censure, for levity and ease, on freedom's high adventure, go shining overseas. Our springing tears adore them, these boys at school and play. Fair fortune years before them, alas, but yesterday, divine with sudden splendor, oh how our eyes were blind. In careless self-surrender, they battle for mankind. Soldiers of freedom, gleaming in golden they depart, transfigured by the dreaming of boyhood's hidden heart. Her lovers they confess them, and rushing on her foes, toss her their youth, God bless them, as lightly as a rose.
Please be seated. As you heard in the reading that Ryan kindly read for us today, the poppy is an important symbol of Veterans Day. And it represented that particular field, Flanders Field, in which so many were lost in World War I. In this country and in England in particular, people on Veterans Day, to honor the sacrifice of those who went before, wear the poppy. And so I'm glad for you to be wearing them this morning. It's my pleasure to welcome back to Roxbury Latin this morning Jimmy Joyce from the class of 2014. As a student, Jimmy was a strong academician, graduating cum laude and being named a National Merit Finalist. He earned 7 varsity letters in football, hockey, and baseball. He was a leader of French Club and contributed meaningfully to Habitat for Humanity and Model UN. And while we care about those important efforts and contributions, we care, as you know, most of all about what kind of person the boy is. And during his years at RL, Jimmy grew to be a reliable, humble, generous young man. Jimmy's experience as an RL student was not without challenge or blemish. The truth is that few boys' experiences are. The measure of any of us is how we learn from our experiences, how we choose to improve ourselves, and how we grow in responsibility to ourselves and others. Jimmy has most certainly done just that. After RL, Jimmy attended Harvard, where he was a member of the rugby team and the first openly gay or bisexual member of his social club. He majored in economics with a minor in French. Upon graduation, Jimmy was commissioned as an officer in the United States Marine Corps, where he served for 4 years, rising to the rank of captain. Following 7 months of training in Quantico, Virginia, he reported to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, for artillery officer course, where he served as class leader. After completing training in 2019, Jimmy reported to 1st Battalion, 12th Marine Regiment, in Kanaho, Hawaii. In the operating forces, Jimmy served first as a fire support officer. He led his fire support team through a successful 6-month deployment to Japan, and after returning from deployment, Jimmy was appointed commander of a howitzer platoon. As platoon commander, he managed 60 Marines and $15 million of weaponry and equipment. While on active duty, Jimmy began acquiring rental properties, which sparked an interest in real estate investing. After leaving active service in 2022, he worked in industrial property investment and acquisitions, and just this summer he began an MBA program at Columbia Business School. There, Jimmy serves on the boards of the Real Estate Association and the LGBTQ+ student organization. Outside of school, he manages his own portfolio of rental properties and consults for a small real estate investment bank. He also volunteers as a mentor with Streetwise Partners, where he helps young adults from disadvantaged backgrounds advance their professional careers. I'm grateful for his being with us this morning to share some of his military experiences and reflections, and to help us honor today all who have served our country in this way. We are so proud of you. Please welcome back Captain James Joyce.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Brennan, for the kind introduction. And thank you, Ms. Berg, and everyone else who helped make today possible. It's good to be back at RL. I notice you guys have your own hockey rink now, huh? That's awesome, but seriously, I have a special spot in my heart for the old Ice Palace at Dexter. There's a special thrill to playing our home games at another school's rink, whose roof looked like it might cave in at any time. It's an honor to speak to you. RL is a special place. It gave me a world-class education, opened many doors, and instilled values in me that have shaped my character and worldview. I made lifelong friends, like Duncan, up there in the balcony, who I've always looked up to. Duncan's been there for me through some of the best and worst times of my life. I grew under the mentorship of dedicated and caring teachers and coaches. In my 18 years as a student and trainee, Monsieur Diop is the best teacher I've ever had, and one of the coolest people I know. Along with Madame White, he instilled in me a lifelong love of French language and culture, for which I'm very grateful. Vous avez décidé d'être admirable en tout pour tout. Merci, mon ami. I was commissioned as an officer in the Marine Corps 5 years ago. It was Mr. Ellison, my math teacher and 50-year advisor here at RL, who administered my oath of office, as he was a former Marine officer himself. Those of you who know Mr. Ellison won't be surprised to hear that, decades after leaving active service, he could still fit into his dress blue uniform, which is pretty remarkable since it's basically a form-fitting wool suit. I'm only a couple years out now, not even, and I don't even know if I could fit into mine anymore. Mr. Ellison actually delivered this Veterans Day address 20 years ago, in 2003, in his second year at the school and Headmaster Jarvis's last. Coincidentally, sitting in the balcony that morning was a young man named Kerry Brennan, because he was interviewing to succeed Mr. Jarvis as headmaster. After my commissioning ceremony, Mr. Ellison gave me one of the most meaningful gifts I've ever received: a pair of cufflinks engraved with the eagle, globe, and anchor of the Marine Corps. Mr. Ellison had received them from his father, also a Marine officer, at his own commissioning 35 years prior. And then he gave them to me, and I'm wearing them now. Thank you, Mr. Ellison, for your example and your mentorship, and for flying in to be here today. And happy belated birthday, Skipper. That's all to say that RL is a truly special place, where I forged some of the most meaningful relationships of my life. As a 28-year-old grad student who hasn't accomplished much of anything, I feel underqualified to speak to you today. But on the other hand, it wasn't too long ago that I sat in your seats, stressing about a physics test, or looking forward to beating up on Sebs in our next football game, and maybe, occasionally, thinking ahead to my future. So hopefully, what I lack in wisdom and experience, I can make up for with a bit of recent perspective. Early on in my life, I knew that I was really lucky. I knew that most kids didn't get to come to a school like this, or go on exchange trips to France or Australia, or tackle 60s that ran on my senior grass. Sure, I worked really hard to get into RL, and worked even harder once I was here. But most kids never even had that chance. Some poor souls are even forced to attend a school like Belmont Hill. Seriously though, I was incredibly fortunate. If it were a race, I trained really hard and ran really fast and finished toward the front. But I also had a 10-mile head start, and most other kids in the world didn't even get a chance to compete. So I wanted to do something meaningful to give back for the advantages I had received. From those to whom much has been given, much will be expected. I had been interested in the military since I was a little kid, and as I got older, I began to see the substantive benefits of military service. First and foremost, the Marine Corps would empower me to make a meaningful impact at a young age. As a new officer, you're put in charge of people and entrusted with significant responsibility right after completing training, not long after graduating from college. Most organizations don't do that. Not that I blame them. Who on earth would trust a 23-year-old with anything? Second, I felt that being thrown in the deep end would be an exciting challenge that would help me grow and improve, especially in my weaker areas. And lastly, I wanted an adventure. Working so hard to get through RL in college, and then just settling into a corporate career for the next 40 years, seemed like it'd be a bit anticlimactic. A missed opportunity to do something meaningful and exciting while I was young. So, while I was in college, I applied for officer candidate school to pursue a commission in the Marine Corps. OCS took place over the summers after my sophomore and junior years in Quantico, Virginia. This was great because I didn't have any military obligations during the school year, so I could just be a normal, degenerate college kid. OCS was an intensive training and screening program, kind of like the officer version of boot camp, with the added wrinkle of being a tryout that you could quit or get cut from. The drill instructor successfully created a miserable, high-intensity environment to evaluate how we performed under stress. We'd be tired, hungry, and wet, and then we'd be thrust into leadership positions and expected to perform. In hindsight, some of their tactics were actually pretty funny. We weren't allowed to speak in the first person. We had to refer to ourselves as this candidate. My head instructor actually once yelled at me for supposedly mispronouncing my own last name. So I had to stand there screaming Joyce until he was satisfied with the pronunciation. OCS certainly wasn't pleasant, and not everyone makes it through, but it's doable if you stay committed to your end goal. After that first summer of training, during my junior year of college, some doubt and fear crept in as I watched the results of the 2016 presidential election. Like many people, I was shocked and frightened by the outcome. We had elected to the most powerful office in the world a manifestly inept and immoral person. He showed unabashed contempt for the rule of law, for American values, and for service members. He had suggested that, as Commander-in-Chief, he would order the military to commit what would amount to war crimes. I worried for the future of my country, and for the first time, I had doubts about my decision to join the military. I wondered what I was getting myself into, what I might be ordered to do, and whether we as a country really were the good guys. But we've never been purely good or bad. No country is monolithic or static or even close to it. We as citizens choose the extent to which we're the good guys, and we continually fall short of our ideals. But we have to keep trying, especially those of us from elite schools and privileged backgrounds. We have particular agency and responsibility for the way our nation's institutions conduct themselves, both at home and abroad. And as I was watching the news that night in November 2016, I remembered a key characteristic of our oath of office. Officers don't swear obedience to any person. We swear allegiance to the Constitution. That's no accident. Officers aren't just empowered to disobey unlawful orders, we're required to. I came to realize that despite my trepidation, the election results only increased the imperative to serve. In times of crisis, when our values are threatened, conscientious officers would be all the more crucial, even at junior levels. After graduating from college and commissioning, all new Marine officers go back down to Virginia for 6 more months of leadership training. While those summers in college had mostly been intended to weed out people who weren't cut out for the job, these next 6 months were more focused on actually teaching us to lead. One of our case studies was about the My Lai massacre, an infamous mass murder of hundreds of Vietnamese civilians perpetrated by a U.S. Army unit during the Vietnam War. The U.S. soldiers acted under the direction of their platoon leader, a young Army officer named William Calley. The details are horrific. It was one of the darkest chapters in the history of the U.S. military and one of its starkest failures of wartime leadership. But the courageous intervention of another Army officer, Hugh Thompson, saved the lives of dozens of civilians. When he witnessed the ongoing slaughter, he landed his helicopter between a group of civilians and approaching American troops. He put himself in the line of fire as he rescued the survivors, and he even ordered his crew to fire at the advancing American troops if they attempted further violence. Thompson flew the survivors to safety and reported the massacre. The perpetrating unit was ordered to stand down, preventing further killings. His report contradicted the unit's false account of the incident and prevented a cover-up. Junior officers have no influence over whether our nation goes to war, but we can influence how it's conducted. In other words, we have more power over jus in bello, the ethical and moral conduct of war, than we do over jus ad bellum, the justness of the decision to go to war. See, Mr. Reed, despite my C+ in your freshman Latin class, I do remember the difference between the ablative and the accusative. Just kidding, I definitely had to Google that. As my country entered an uncertain new chapter, I wanted to do what I could, control what I could, to ensure that its ideals were preserved. Ultimately, despite damage to our institutions and our standing in the world, in the years following 2016, the worst did not come to pass. We avoided catastrophe not through some inherent strength of our institutions, but due to the actions of principled individuals in senior national security roles. But we're not out of the woods. Our constitutional system will be continually tested, and we always need good officers to safeguard American values. Looking back, joining the Marine Corps is the best decision I've ever made. My primary motivation for doing so was service, giving back, making an impact, helping others. And I'm glad that I was able to do so in some small ways. But as I've been reflecting on my experience, I'm struck most by all that the Marine Corps gave me. After finishing artillery training in beautiful Lawton, Oklahoma, I got stationed in Hawaii, which was pretty sweet. But more importantly, I'm grateful for the dedicated professionals whom I served alongside. And I'm particularly grateful for the enlisted Marines whom I had the privilege of leading. Something from officer training that really stuck with me is the concept of servant leadership. That it is an officer's sacred responsibility to serve and care for those under his command. My enlisted Marines came from every corner of our country, from every walk of life, but all of them, as teenagers, had raised the right hand and written a blank check to the Marine Corps, knowing full well the sacrifices and risks that entailed. Through their idealism, their fidelity, their selflessness, their ingenuity, those guys sustained me when things got hard and inspired me to do right by them. And yes, as young men, their occasional lapses in judgment frustrated me, as I'm sure your teachers can relate. But getting to lead them, serve them, bond with them, and foster their growth was a special privilege and the honor of a lifetime. I will probably never have a better job than platoon commander. Career-wise, I peaked at age 26, and I'm totally okay with that. I'm also grateful for the lifelong friends I made in the Marines, a couple of whom are here today. As you guys have probably experienced going through the ringer of RL together, there's a special bond and depth of friendship that comes through a bit of shared suffering. And there's plenty of that in the Marines. I discovered whole new dimensions of discomfort and exhaustion. I didn't know I could get so cold, or so hot, or so tired. But I probably could have told you that crawling through a swamp of stagnant water might lead to pink eye. But hey, at least I got some great friends out of it. Those guys were there for me when I needed them most. Just 2.5 weeks into active duty, while we were beating each other senseless in the McMap pits, the martial arts pits, I came back to my barracks room to learn that my dad had died suddenly. Despite having just recently met me, my friends were more supportive than I ever could have hoped. They helped sustain me through a very challenging period. Even seemingly small gestures meant a lot to me. They sent my family flowers and a card with a beautiful inscription. When I returned to base, late on the night of the funeral, Casey, up there in the balcony, had already loaded my gear for me for a hike early the next morning. A few months later, Matt, also up there in the cheap seats, was the first person in the Marines that I came out to. He was completely accepting and supportive. I came out to Casey shortly thereafter, and again shortly after that, and finally a third time shortly after that, because he kept thinking I was joking. But he too was completely supportive. And it was a privilege to serve as best man at his and Sarah's wedding last year. Through my experience in the Marines, I certainly grew as a person, professional, and leader. I never had any epiphany about the secret of leadership, but I learned a thing or two along the way. I didn't transform into an entirely new person or shed all of my shortcomings. I still have anxiety and self-doubt, and as my mom frequently reminds me, a tendency to dramatically overanalyze everything. But I definitely got a lot better at managing those traits and working through them, and sometimes even using them to my advantage. Through RL in college, I was a perfectionist, leading to a lot of late nights and some late assignments. A belated sorry to all my English teachers. A few years ago, the prospect of writing and delivering the speech would have been daunting. But in the Marines, I didn't have time for that. When I was a platoon commander, I led the convoy every time our artillery unit displaced to a new position. Displacement was a significant logistical undertaking. Over 100 personnel, dozens of vehicles, and the 6 cannons themselves. And the convoy brief that I'd deliver was accordingly long and detailed, usually 15 to 20 pages, which was all well and good when I had hours or days to prepare it, but I usually didn't. Often I'd only have 10 to 15 minutes advance notice of a displacement, and I'd have to write and deliver the brief within that time. It was stressful and it was frustrating, but also instructive. It forced me to triage and focus on only the parts of the brief that were absolutely essential. It also helped me realize that good enough was usually good enough, especially when it had to be. You guys are going to come out of here with great friends and mentors, and with an outstanding education that will set you up for success in college and beyond. You'll attend good schools and land good jobs. You will have won the race. But like me, you will have won a race with a 10-mile head start in a contest where most people weren't even able to compete. That's not meant to diminish your accomplishments or the significant effort you've expended making it through RL. You're all smart, hardworking, good guys, or you wouldn't be here. You'd be at Bell Hill. And when you get those acceptance letters and job offers, you will have earned them, and you should be proud. Recognizing our privilege and celebrating our accomplishments are not mutually exclusive. Far from it. I urge you to use the opportunities that the school has provided you, the values that it has instilled in you, to serve your community in some way. Whether it's through military service or otherwise, find a cause you believe in and pursue it. Cynicism is easy and fashionable and oftentimes understandable. But it's a cop-out. It's fear masquerading as pragmatism. And it's a bleak way to go through life. There's nothing wrong with pursuing lucrative career paths. It's what I'm doing now. But you don't have to sell out right away. Trust me, guys, you have your whole life to sit behind a computer. There's no rush, and I promise it's not that fun. Be idealistic and be adventurous, especially while you're young. There's no better time to do so. Regardless of what career path you choose, I ask you all to be engaged and informed citizens. The U.S. military acts in our name and on our behalf as Americans, whether we're directly involved or not. As privileged sons of this republic, we have a duty to influence what we can, to do what we can, to ensure the just conduct of our nation's military. And that starts with understanding it. I frequently meet intelligent, educated Americans who know shockingly little about the military. And it's dangerous. A citizenry that does not understand its military cannot truly support its veterans, nor can it effectively oversee the defense establishment or hold it accountable. Ignorance leaves us susceptible to manipulation and prevents us from asking the questions that might prevent budget-busting weapons programs or endless wars with no clearly defined goal and no end in sight. Be inquisitive, be skeptical, be informed as citizens. Don't just reflectively thank veterans for their service. Ask them what they did and why they did it. Don't be afraid to look dumb. I appreciate when people ask me questions about the military, because I know for every one who asks, there are 10 who don't even bother. Before I close, I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. Don't let fear guide your actions. Don't let fear of rejection or exclusion stop you from doing what you want to do in life. You don't have to fit the mold. In fact, maybe you shouldn't. Molds are limiting and boring. You don't have to choose between different parts of your identity. If you're gay or bi or whatever, there's nothing you can't do. I'm not straight, and I did just fine in an exceptionally heteronormative organization. Decide what you want to do it well, and don't let anything stop you. What matters more than the opportunities we've been given is what we do with them. And I encourage you to consider public service in some form. From those to whom much has been given, much will be expected. And you all have so much to give. Thank you. If y'all have any questions, Fire away. Bueller. Anyone got any good jokes or anything?
Were there ever instances where you were asked to do something that you didn't like ethically or morally believe in?
No, I wasn't. Thank you for that question, Zach. No, I was fortunate that that never happened. There were like strategic decisions or like things I didn't agree with from like an efficacy standpoint, but that is true in any job. No, I never had to do anything. I was never asked to do anything that I believed was unethical. Thank God. I hope I would have had the strength to refuse that, but it was never tested really. Yes.
What do you feel like the benefits of serving are?
Yeah, so the question was what I think the benefits of serving are. Kind of like I touched on, I mean, I really enjoyed giving back in a big way. I enjoyed the friends I made, and I think most of all I enjoyed the Marines I got the chance to lead. It was seriously like the best job ever, getting to stand in front of those guys. They're awesome, they're inspiring. They didn't have the same advantages that we did, but they are really, really impressive young men. The biggest thing too, I think, was just kind of the sense of purpose, really being like mission oriented toward a cause I really believed in. Not to sugarcoat it, there were a lot of days I didn't love what I was doing. It wasn't all like always like a great time. But fundamentally, even through all the red tape and the headaches and the nonsense, I fundamentally believed what we were doing mattered, and that felt really good. And that's something I think is pretty hard to find. Yes.
What made you choose to be an officer of the Marine Corps?
Sure, good question. Well, I'll start with the Marine Corps. To put it in terms you guys could understand, I wanted to be kind of like a ground leadership role, like that frontline, hands-on leadership with the Marines. So it's kind of between the Army and the Marines. And like to kind of put it in terms you guys can understand, the Army's mid. It's the nobles of military branches. No, I'm just kidding. But seriously, I was drawn to the Marine Corps culture, and it's kind of high standard, and it's like expectation of excellence, which I found really distinctive. And that was definitely borne out. They really do have a distinct culture. All the branches, obviously, I was completely joking. They all serve important functions, and they all have very elite units that are far cooler than anything I did. But the Marine Corps is the smallest, so I think it has the strongest culture and the highest standard, and that's what really drew me to it. And it's also kind of, it's the tip of the spear. It's America's expeditionary force and readiness, kind of like America's 911 force. So I knew I wanted to be at the point where I could be at the point of greatest influence if anything bad happened. Thanks for the question. Yes, sir. Blue shirt, yeah. Sorry, cannons are loud. Hearing bad.
As a previous member who served in the military, what are your thoughts on the current conflicts internationally?
Yeah, great question. I'm sorry I don't have any particular geopolitical expertise. You guys probably got speakers who are far more qualified to answer that question. So you're talking about the wars in Ukraine and in Gaza. First, with the war in Ukraine, we absolutely have to support the Ukrainians against Russian aggression. We can't just allow a free European state to fall to Russian aggression. That would be such a dangerous precedent and inherently wrong for a number of reasons. So yeah, we have to keep supporting the Ukrainians as long as it takes. But I have been inspired by how well they perform. They've exceeded all expectations of how they perform against a far, far, far stronger adversary. With regards to the recent events in Gaza, I mean, that's just a horrible situation. It's a tragedy. I don't have any special insight into it. I just really hope I mean, obviously what Hamas did to Israel was, barbaric and horrible. I just really hope that Israel doesn't make the same mistakes that we made in Iraq and Afghanistan, kind of getting into wars that, without a clearly defined objective, because it doesn't end well. Yes.
What aspects of your time at RL helped you in your time of service in the Marines?
Yeah, so the question was what aspects of my time at RL helped me with my service in the Marines. Actually, the academic, I mean, I think a lot of it was kind of soft skills, kind of the values instilled in me, I think, both through RL and through my upbringing from my parents, frequently reminding me how lucky I was, how fortunate I was. I think as far as more tangible skills, honestly, I'd say the academic rigor was really helpful. Artillery school was actually like the most academically rigorous 4 months I've ever gone through in my life, like far harder than RL or Harvard. So having those like study skills have been very helpful in the Marines and since. Yeah, other than that, I think it was kind of just the values and the soft skills instilled in me.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Jimmy Joyce, for his wisdom and for his example. I hope that if you'd like to say hello to him at the end of fall, that you'll stick around and do that. I also want to recognize his mom and his brother who are here today. A young man like this doesn't turn up on our doorstep and be as impressive as he is without the influence of his family, and to marry into his father, State Senator Brian Joyce, who modeled service for all of us. I'm really grateful and so happy that you're here today. Now let us pray. God of our fathers, who has blessed this country with graces beyond measure, teach us to appreciate those who have gone before us and have made the ultimate sacrifice in order that we might be free. Inspire us to be relentless in our own pursuit of freedom. Grant us the wisdom to discern that which is worth fighting for, and lead us always along paths of peace and brotherhood and righteousness. Amen. Now please pass the peace. As I said at the conclusion of Hall, if you'd like to say hello to Captain Joyce, I know he'd be delighted to see you. For the adults in the room, please join us for a reception, if you're free, in the refectory at the conclusion. Thanks very much. Now join, please, in God Bless America.
While the storm was gathered far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair.
Thank you, Elliot and Mr. Uptight. Have a great day. Class 1.